Give it to me.
Hey, this is Nomad, host and creator of the Career Musician Podcast. Why do they call me Nomad? Well, I traveled the globe, spreading the joy of music one song at a time. And now I bring you wisdom, tried and true knowledge, and life experiences of my colleagues and peers in this crazy business we call music. Welcome to the Career Musician Podcast with Nomad. Today I have my Goomba guitar brother, Joe Augello from the 516 Strong Island in New York City.
This is the Career Musician Podcast with your host, Nomad.
Okay, as Joe says, the 516. Here's the thing, Joe Augello and myself, we met out here in Los Angeles. We had no clue that we're both from Italian descent, both from New York, both played guitar, both around the same age, both have the same guitar heroes. I mean, come on, you can't get any more coincidental than that. But then to top it off, as Joe always reminds me, we got Joe Satriani, the Satch, and Steve Vai, who are also from the same neck of the woods that we are, and they're both Italian guitar slinging brothers. So we got this little Italian guitar club going on over here. What I love about Joe is he's got so much passion, soul, rock, fire, and everything wrapped up in one. He's played with Robin Thicke, Jennifer Hudson, Backstreet Boys, Israel Houghton and the New Breed, and Free Chapel Live, just to name a few. Here we go with Joe. We're at Nomad's place, and I got the one and only Joe Augello, my Italian brother from another mother.
How you doing?
How you doing? We're from the same hood. What part of Strong Island are you from?
I'm from the very beginning of Nassau County. Probably the first town, which is Elmont.
So that's like, way out west.
That's where I grew up. Saw my first concert there.
And who's your first concert?
1977. My first concert was supposed to be Elvis, but he died 6 days before the show. So a couple of weeks later, I saw Glenn Campbell.
Ooh.
And that was my first concert, Belmont Racetrack.
Wow.
And I got to meet him. I got to meet him that day, and I was 4 years old. So it was the only thing I asked him was, "Did you know Elvis?" Because I was a huge Elvis. That was like, really the first thing that made me want to play music or want to,
Wow.
And and that was the first guitar player I ever saw, man. I watched him do what I'll never forget. He did the theme to the Lone Ranger. Like in between songs.
Do you know it?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
Should have thought about that one.
All right, wow.
But yeah, no, I remember, being 4 years old and watching him like just shred, on his ovation.
Can you explain what you mean by shred? Because that's before the term shred was even invented. I think I know exactly what you mean.
Right.
But how do you mean that?
Well,
because I know you don't mean it literal, but there's certain contexts.
Right. Well, in his way, I mean, he was a picker. He was a Nashville,
chicken picker.
Well,
Kinda.
But he was single note guy, probably more than a chicken picking guy. He had great technique. I mean, his very scalular.
So bluegrassy, flat picking kind of, or
yeah. But also
shredding it.
He could kind of. He had Ingve chops, you know what I mean? It was, I remember I didn't, I was 4 years old, but at the same time, I just remember he was playing really, really fast.
And clean.
And clean.
And
he was playing on acoustic. He had an ovation, yeah.
So it's Ingve chops. With some country influence.
Oh, yeah.
But Ingve, also rock, the early rock influence.
Well, I mean, you remember Glenn Campbell was part of the Wrecking Crew. So he played on all the Beach Boys stuff. He was a lot more than a lot of people probably know him for. I mean, he was played on these iconic songs back in the day. To see that as a young kid who was really into music and, loved the guitar. I mean, just Elvis holding the guitar. He didn't even have to play it. That was the first, my first mental picture of wow, And, so it was Glenn Campbell at Belmont
That was your
Racetrack.
first concert.
Mm-hmm.
So was he one of your first influences then with Elvis then, Glenn and Elvis?
Maybe subconsciously. I mean, my dad
Okay.
used to play. My dad is an audiophile. So our house was a record store when I was a kid. It was, I was literally a kid in a candy store, with music. And he loved everything. from the Elvis stuff and the Beatles, and he loved a lot of doo-wop music, and New York, back then that was the sound of that was the sound of the city, and
that sure was the sound.
Yeah, and country music at that time in the 70s.
And country music was
like in the late 70s, in the early 80s, there was that big resurgence in country music where it became like pop music, so there was a lot of that. I found a Black Sabbath record in my dad's collection, and scared the crap out of me, and Motown stuff. My dad is he is the reason why I play music, he was just a big music fan,
So I feel like you, first of all, you just confirmed, you just affirmed it. I feel like we are like the same dude, because my dad was my biggest musical influence, and both growing up in Long Island, both Italian, of course my dad's from Cuba. But still, and then, dare I say it, drum roll, we both were studying under the feet of EVH, and
right.
And so I love the fact that the initial impetus didn't come from Eddie.
No, not for a long time.
That's really
cool. Well, there's a lot that happened before that.
Wait, there's guitar players before Eddie?
Well, it wasn't
no,
even
I love
guitar
that.
players.
Just music.
Music, back then, especially in New York, and I didn't realize it at the time, but, we were too young to get the punk stuff and the glam rock stuff. It didn't affect me, but the disco stuff did. And that was, unknowing to me at the time, a big, huge influence on me. Hearing, my dad had Chic records. I was listening to Nile Rodgers.
Before you even knew what that was.
Yeah. And the Bee Gees was probably the first thing that really, really... my cousin Steve, we used to play music as kids, and that was our first real influence. At that time, everybody wanted to be Kiss. In the late 70s, and me and Steve wanted to be the Bee Gees. So the Bee Gees music had a big influence on my writing and how I heard music, like those chord changes. When you would hear like...
So we mean,
stuff like that. It would always like kind of tug at my heart, and I didn't know what that was.
Those add nines, the major nines, the susses, the minor sevens,
the
upper tension, 11s,
all that stuff would always have an effect on me emotionally, and I didn't understand what that meant.
I like the way you just iterated that. That really makes a lot of sense, because if you think like an E flat chord, but then you take away the G, you put the F, right? And then you add the major seven, but because of the F, it's major. See, like, and then honestly, if you just break that down, it could just be a B flat triad
chord, right?
With an E flat in the bass. But the way you said that, and it was tugging at your heart, it's interesting how chord tones can actually tug at your emotions.
Yeah,
I mean, what's that all about?
Yeah, well,
isn't that a
especially
trip?
when you're 4 or 5 years old, to be affected that way with music was a trip for me. And I didn't understand it. I just, I would listen to these songs over and over and over, and I still listen to them all the time, and I'm still affected by them that way till this day. To me, that's the Bible of modern day songwriting. If you listen to those Bee Gees songs, you have the Beatles, and you have the great stuff that they did, and to me, after them is the Bee Gees. These cool. guys, they paved the way for so much.
And then, like you said, Chic, the disco scene. So when did the soul R&B bug bite you?
Well, we used to go roller skating all the time, and that's where I would hear music. The roller rink. The radio, but mostly the roller rink. We would always go. And the Jackson 5 was like probably the first album that I had on my own, Skywriter by the Jackson 5.
Wow.
And then, but like in the disco days, it was Shake Your Body Down to the Ground. And I remember, picking up my guitar. I had this little acoustic guitar, and I would try and play stuff. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know if my guitar was in tune, but I would be like... You know, and I had no idea. You know, I would just play what I heard.
Who did that? Shake Your Body.
The Jacksons.
The Jacksons?
Yeah. So I would take my guitar. I had this really crappy acoustic guitar. The action was like this high.
Right.
I didn't even know if it was in tune, but I would try and play things along. I didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't play chords.
So you're cutting your teeth at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, but I didn't know. You know, I didn't know.
Yeah, but that's
that
okay because you felt it and heard it.
And then Off the Wall came out. And that was when I started to hear guitar parts. You know, and I would pick them out.
David Williams and Paul Jackson Jr., right?
Anything that had single notes in it, like, you know, I couldn't play chords.
Right.
So when I would hear stuff that had notes in it, I didn't even know that was the guitar, but I loved that part, so I'd try and play it on my little acoustic, and I would pick them out, you know. So anything that had little riffs in it, I could learn. So I could play these songs, not well, but I was able to pick them out and learn them.
Wow.
You know, but I couldn't play chords, you know. So that came a little later when I started taking lessons. So I had all these little. So I think that's what kind of really started to the R&B stuff started to sink in.
You said it at lunch earlier. You said we grew up on the Riff Masters.
Yeah.
And you just played 4 or 5 pieces that are so exemplary of that. They're not only were these songs crafted so well, but the lyrics, the songs, the melodies. But then they had the musical arrangements, the riffs.
Yeah.
Those 4 riffs you just played, as soon as you play them, immediately identify.
Right. Well, back then, you know, things were still guitar driven. Even the disco music, you know.
Right.
And you hear like you know, all that stuff. I mean, that was like. It was on every day, you know.
So those voicings are so informed. Like those are smart voicings, right?
Right.
Whether the cats back then,
he did know.
Yeah, he knew. See, well, Nile Rodgers is brilliant, you know. So he was paying attention. He's a jazzer. But even like whether they knew or they didn't know, doesn't matter.
Right.
It was still informed, and there was somebody in the room or somebody involved in the overall production or arrangement. Who was like, yeah, you play that, I'm going to have the strings do this, I'm going to have the keys do, you know, so, I mean, and I miss those days because that's when bands were in the room together creating, right?
Yeah,
you know? Now, it's coming back, I do believe, you know, so that's the good news.
It's some of it's there.
But I love that you shared this history with us, how you came up, because that is a rich musical history.
Yeah.
All right, what do all New Yorkers have in common? The sense of what good pizza is, for crying out loud. I know a good pizza pie. And yes, you call it a pizza pie because you take the triangular slice and you fold it and it drips down the grease and oh my God, I could taste it now. It's so freaking good. So anyway, Joe and I connect on that front. But then we also love to talk guitar and shop and music and all that stuff. But then we just like to kick it. We go back. What I love about Joe, once again, is his passion and fire. He's very similar to my style in that we both love funk, R&B, and soul, but we also came up with rock. So we kind of try to blend the two styles, and it's very cool to have some friends that do the same thing or similar, but once again, although we're similar, we're not the same because we each have our own unique voice. And guess what? We don't even trip because we do not compete for work. You know why? Because everybody has their lane, and you stay in your lane, and you spread positivity, and the world is a better place for it. Let's get back to it with Joe.
Make your voice heard. Leave a review and subscribe at the Career Musician Podcast.
You know, I wasn't thinking about being a lead guitar player just yet. We were really involved in our church back then, and our pastor at the church was this lead guitar playing Hendrixy guy. We had this big rock band at church back before rock bands were cool at church. Yeah, but I mean, these guys were like Cream. They were like Hendrix, and they would sing about Jesus. Right. So anyway, we were very close with the pastor and his family. My dad was very involved in the church, and they were making an album. So we'd go to the studio. My dad would take me to the studio, and I would just sit there and watch this guy just wail. My first real guitar hero was him, you know.
Wow.
And I'd watch him do these licks, and it was just bluesy stuff. Like he'd play, just Ace Frehley kind of stuff, and I'd be, like, wow, and he was lefty, so it was so far out for me.
Because now you're looking at it flipped upside down, the whole thing is out of shape.
So, I thought righty guys can't do that, it was just for the lefty guys, and I would see Hendrix, and I'd be like, see, same thing, It kind of grew from there, I guess before Eddie, it was those songs, it was MTV, I would sit there and watch, like, the first days of MTV. I remember when MTV came out, and, it was like in the summertime, my mom's like, you're not going to sit here and,
watch TV
I was like,
all day.
But I showed her, I was like, now I know how to play the songs I can watch, and I used to hear, and I was like, that's how you play that song, And I was taking lessons at the time by then, so I knew all my chords.
What I love about this, I'm getting a little history guitar lesson because I didn't pick any of these up.
Yeah.
I heard them, I just didn't cop them.
Right.
Yeah.
So those songs, and that's what I would figure out.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so and that was the thing. There was guitar solos in every song. There was guitar in every song.
In every song, but you don't understand. People who can't see this, you have to understand. Joe comes from, obviously we cut from the same mold, but he's got a plexi pedal over there. That's the Marshall plexi. That was Eddie's original sound. Mm-hmm. Not only does Joe know how to play it right, he's got the right sound. So even if he's going through an old basement, which actually is the original.
It's a Marshall.
It's a Marshall plexi chassis. So anyway, but the nuances, folks, okay? And this is what I want everybody to understand. And all you guitar players out there who aren't hip, you're like, oh man, I haven't really ventured out into the amp world or to the pedal world or to really the tone world, because it is a big world with bazillions of options. You have to understand something. I'm making a big deal about it, Joe, because you just nailed it. Hi, I'm Nomad, host for the Career Musician Podcast. In my 30 years plus as a professional musician, I've done just about everything to earn a living in this crazy biz. Studio musician, world tours, local club gigs, teaching, composing for TV and film, you name it, I've done it. Through this process, I've curated a vast network of talented music makers and shakers, so now I'm sharing with you their insider look of the industry with advice and anecdotes of which I think you'll thoroughly enjoy. It is my desire to inspire, motivate, teach, and reappropriate the power that musicians have in the art of music itself.
The Career Musician Podcast with your host, Nomad.
All right, Joe, what I love about your playing is you're so diverse, and that's why I really do, because we're buds. I mean, we're both of the same, we're cut from the same mold. We both grew up with this desire to be a studio cat before we even knew what a studio was.
Yeah.
Well,
I never really had a desire to be in a band. I was in bands as a kid.
Yeah, I was.
It kind of grew thin once I started learning more about the guys that I really loved. Once I got into Steve Vai and Steve Lukather and understood, it was more appealing to me to see those guys playing with all these different people.
All the different cats.
And experiencing all these different types of music and all these different kinds of gigs, and I loved being in a band with my friends, but I always knew that wasn't where I was going to end up.
Same here. So it's like we were aspiring to a higher calling without even knowing what it was. Mm-hmm. Perfect segue. Now we know your history, we know your influences. Tell me a little bit about your credits. And a lot of guys are like, oh man, I don't want to talk about my... It's not bragging, it's like letting people know, look, this is what I've done, this is what I do. I know you've been with Robin Thicke for quite a while.
Yeah.
R&B
10 years.
Superstar, Robin Thicke, Alan Thicke's son.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
10 years. So aside from that, tell us some other...
The first kind of thing I ever did, I was 16 and I played on some stuff for Public Enemy when I was...
Wow.
In a junior in high school, I think it was. I was in this band. Me and my cousin Steve got into this band that they were like a studio band sort of, and the guy who was sort of like the mastermind behind the band, they were like twice our age. We were still in high school, and these guys were in their mid-20s, late 20s, and the mastermind behind it, this guy Alan, he was a pretty happening engineer. And he did a lot of hip hop stuff. He would have me come in and do sessions. I was this kid, and I'd come in and do these sessions. And
How old were you?
I was 16. And he would get me sessions. I remember I did a session for this guy who was an Elvis impersonator, and he was doing some, but it was kind of like soul kind of stuff, and stuff that I was playing before that I kind of knew that at that time I wasn't really playing because I was into all the Steve Vai stuff.
But you still had that background, you still had that foundation.
Yeah. So I did work on some stuff for Public Enemy. I think it was their DJ, Terminator X, like some remix stuff for them back in the day. But yeah, that was like the first real kind of credit I ever had,
What other credits you got?
Well, then I went to college and I came out and I started doing a lot of dance stuff.
Yeah.
Like playing on some dance records that were like, pretty popular records back, I guess, in New York and stuff. At that time, it was a lot of house music and everything. Wow. And then I actually started doing, it was like the age of the remix, back then, like the late 90s and stuff, early 2000s.
I think you told me you were a remixer.
Yeah, me and Steve, we had like a little production team and we were doing remixes, like stuff for RCA and stuff, so
really?
That sort of became, well, there's a whole other thing, that happened. I went to college, I went to music school, and the day I got to music school was like the day Smells Like Teen Spirit came out.
Oh my gosh.
So it was like everything I worked for, practiced for, back then, to play like Steve Vai and stuff like that.
4 chords now.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's it.
Overnight, it became exactly what not to do. I got calls from like, hey man, we want you to come and play with us. Do that Steve Vai shit, man. Do that.
Yeah.
Till like the very next day, do not play like Steve Vai. He was the poster boy for that.
So you're cutting your teeth in the studio, you're doing remixes, you open your own production company, and then what happens? Did you decide to move to LA? Or?
Yeah, well, I always knew, and this was a weird thing, like I always knew ever since I was a kid that I should be in LA.
Yeah. Okay.
I saw the movie The Jazz Singer when I was a kid. Remember The Jazz Singer, Neil Diamond?
Yeah.
It was just kind of stupid, but that movie like lit something, lit a fire inside of me. He was this dude from New York, had nothing going on. He moved out to LA and became this huge rock star.
Yeah.
And just the thought of the movie, just seeing him in LA and in the studio, and I was like, I was so inspired. I was like, wow, that's what I need to do, like Neil Diamond. I need to move out there.
I need to be like Neil Diamond.
And I would see the movies when we were kids. But it was cooler then, Love on the Rocks.
Oh, yeah. It's cool,
anyway, so then I would see the movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and The Karate Kid, and I was like, I belong hanging out with these people.
That's what I want to do.
So, and, looking at all the records, all the guys I loved, I mean, it was all made there. It was everything from Thriller to the Toto records, and the same guys playing on everything. Steve Vai was there, it was like Eddie was there, I got to be there, So, a lot of stuff happened. In the 90s were a weird time for me as far as just like, you're supposed to find yourself in your 20s, and I kind of was so lost, I didn't know what I was doing, like
I can relate.
Playing jazz and trying to, be that guy,
Yep.
And I guess you have to go through that stuff as a musician, but I had a few epiphanies, along the way. But what was funny was, I was in that frame of mind, I'll go back a little, and I went to go see Prince by myself. I went to go see Prince do this show, and I had like front row to see Prince.
Dude.
And he comes up there and just plays one fucking note, and it killed me. And I was always a huge Prince fan, and it just kind of set things as far as me with the guitar in a whole different way.
It aligned you.
Yeah. I was like, you know what? I'm not a jazz guy. I'm not a bebop player.
Right.
I want to play one note and watch these 20,000 people
go nuts.
And that was sort of the whole thing right there for me. It changed a lot of things, and it made me realize as a guitar player, I think it's, and you'll probably agree with me because we've both been through sort of the same thing, especially when you're a studio guy and you play songs. I think it's a lot harder to play something simple but make it really effective. Than to just
then to
play a bunch of notes,
crazy shred fest,
and have it just go over everybody's head, because you're appealing to a small group of people,
right? Very small group,
and
who are all narcissists and really don't give a shit about you or anybody else anyway.
So I learned
So
very quickly.
Yeah,
Once I started getting into, all the crazy harmony and all this stuff that I was doing, and I'm like, it's making sense, but it doesn't move me.
Right.
And I'm not saying jazz sucks or whatever, but it wasn't who I was going to be. I'm a songwriter. It goes back to the Bee Gees thing. I was always affected by that.
Huge difference.
And I started writing songs at a very young age.
But let it be known that those guys were pulling on jazz influences.
Right,
as well.
right.
E flat major 9 and minor 7. Come on, dude.
That was the thing.
5s.
Even guys like Nile Rodgers, they chose to, they knew how to make that work.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
They used just enough of it to appeal to the masses.
Yeah. So
I love that.
So that was like a big epiphany for me, as far as just the way it was me coming into myself.
Well, you founded your principles, your true belief, your inner core values and principles, right?
Yeah, and it helped me to take everything that I loved and meld it together and make me, my tone, my sound. You know what I mean? And I think that's probably the most important thing for musicians to have, and it's the one thing, I know we're going to get into the whole social media thing and the younger generation players and what we've been seeing,
right,
and what we always talk about, and especially out here in LA, because everybody's trying to get a gig and everybody's trying to fit in, and that's all cool, but I mean, you have to develop your own voice, and you have to be unapologetic about it. I think that's what tone is to me,
But so what I always say is methods and techniques change, but principles never do.
Right.
So you found your principles, you built them, and now and as you go along, your methods and your techniques of gaining knowledge and learning things and experimenting might change, but your core value system is still the same.
Yeah.
And I think what you just said is accurate. It's almost like sometimes the newer generation doesn't have a core value. That they're so busy. You said it again earlier.
It's
content versus connecting.
Yeah.
Human connecting.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
And I think that's the thing. We grew up in an age where if you wanted to play along to something, you had to go get a bunch of guys and play with them.
And you had to ask them, and you had to be you had to be reverent. You had to be like, hey, Mr. So-and-so, I really dig what you're doing. Man, I'm like, is it okay if I study under you, or can I jam with you, or can I,
come and just be a fly on the wall?
Right.
I had a teacher in college that was, he was like a pretty happening fusion guitar player, and I would go to all his gigs and just sit there, just sit there with him and just soak it all in, and I would play with him, but I would watch him come alive when he was on stage with other people, and I would see the brilliance in him come out, and I'm like, man,
incredible.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and that's it's hard nowadays. I watch these super technicians, and we could have a whole other podcast on just this.
Yeah, we could.
But and all these cats out here, they're good musicians, they're good players,
great musicians.
But I think that having your own voice is going to make you win in the end.
I agree.
Instead of chasing mediocre, I can't even say mediocre, but like Michael Jackson said it. He's like, learn from the greats and be better than them.
There you go.
Not learn from the goods and be equal.
Be gooder or be equal.
You know what I mean?
But even let's put that in context, because it doesn't necessarily mean better technique wise. It doesn't mean like, well, if I can pick, my modes. Right. So let's say I get them up to what? I think at the peak of my practicing days, I was probably up to like 150 16th notes. Right? Okay. It doesn't mean be even faster than that. It doesn't mean get it to 200 BPM. What does it mean to you?
To me, it means to take everything that you love, to take everything that moves you, and make that into your own, your own style. And that's really what it comes down to. It's not faster. It's not better.
Right.
It's your personal connection with
because
your
there's. I always say there's no better in music. It's just like there's no metrics to measure it like there are sports.
No. Hey, to each his own. But I think that people get past the thing of what they're supposed to play and what they're supposed to sound like, then to just be yourself, and be unapologetic. Because the greats became that way. You know, Jimi Hendrix wasn't playing like anybody else.
Nah.
He wasn't following any book. He wrote his own book.
Wasn't.
You know what I mean?
I mean, when he wrapped his thumb over the top of the neck, or for him, the bottom, I guess, and when he was doing, you know,
right.
There was nobody doing that.
You're not supposed to do that.
Right. Actually, if you did that, your teacher would yell at you, right? So that's a great point.
You know what I mean? But, you know, by doing that, he changed the way
you think about it. So Joe has some crazy touring stories with Robin Thicke out there on the road. And for one, I think it was about a week, a handful of years ago, we were both at center staging. I was rehearsing with Babyface, and he was next door with Robin Thicke. And we used to hang out in the hallways, listen to each other. And I never forget, he came over to me and he goes, "Bro, do you know something? For an R&B artist, a legendary R&B artist, your guitar is freaking loud." I was like, "Why, thank you, Joe. I take that as a compliment." I always say that we're an R&B band that plays like a rock and roll band. Anyway, it's a lot of fun. But look, speaking of playing live, I want to talk about stage volume. I know that is something that a lot of us struggle with, or it's kind of like, you know, taboo. But here's the deal. Here's the deal, folks. If you are not the front man, if you are not the singer in the center spotlight, or, you know, the lead act, the principal, if you will, then you need to be sensitive to everybody in the band and to what the principal artist wants as far as stage volume. You can't be too loud. I don't care what instrument you play, bass, drums, guitar, keys, if you sing, you play, whatever it is that you're doing, you have to be sensitive to everybody around you on stage. So let's all keep that in mind and share the good word. Thank you, Joe.
Add the Career Musician to your playlist on Spotify.
Yeah. So look, we're going to make this happen. This last section, pop. The Career Musician, this is all about empowering upcoming generations or aspiring career musicians like ourselves, or even people, I don't care what age they are, what group or faction they're from, but just they really want to do it. And they need some advice, they need some input, they need some guidance. So I'm going to ask you a couple quick shots here.
Sure.
Touring essentials, like whether it's gear or peripheral, I don't care. So if you say, I got to have a toothbrush and this, then fine, tell me. What are your touring essentials?
I need my iPod. I still
use an iPod?
Because that thing, man, that's more important to me than anything. That's my sanity. You know, I still have music on my phone, but all my essential music that I need to live is on that.
Your audiophile collection that your dad taught you is on that.
Everything is on there. Great. Everything is on it. So all that's
right, what else?
That's the first thing I pack. With me.
Yeah.
That's really the one thing I really look for besides the essentials that you need.
Well, let's talk about gear. Yeah, let's talk about the obvious. You know.
Well, if we're
as
going,
a guitar player.
Right. This guitar comes with me wherever I go.
Okay.
This is my number one.
And who is it? And
it's made by Carvin. Well, the Kiesel family now, but this is before they switched the names. And this is a semi-hollow. It's their SH575 model. And with Robin, I need a trem pedal for a couple of songs. So I have a tremolo.
Do you bring a delay on the cookies? Okay.
Carbon copy.
Just keep it small and simple.
Yeah. So that's about it. So all this other stuff, this is just
quick
extra.
tour essentials.
Yeah.
All right. How do you carry the whole? So you got your guitar. We got your iPad. You have a backpack and your clothes. How do you? I mean, I'm pretty pragmatic about this. I like to know how everybody compartmentalizes things.
I'll bring my guitar. Yeah. Which I can
in a gig bag?
Okay. Yeah, my iGig bag.
Okay.
And usually I'll stuff as much stuff as I can, my in-ears, my iPad, my picks, everything goes in there.
In the pockets.
It's got tons of pockets. These things are amazing bags.
iGig, okay.
And I'll bring my pedal board, which I have to check in, obviously.
Right.
And then
what kind of case do you put the pedal board?
It's a SKB board that I bring with me.
So it's flight worthy.
Yeah. So that I can check in. It's under 50 pounds, so I'm usually good. If you fly, I have status on some airlines, so I usually don't have to pay for a bag.
Sure.
And then I just have my overnight carry-on roller bag that sometimes I gotta push a little to get both things on the plane, but they're usually cool.
So you're carrying the guitar in the overnight bag, and then you're checking the pedal board, and that's it. You're ready to go.
Yeah,
that's your touring. You gotta love it.
For
Keep
the
it
fly
streamlined.
dates. Yeah,
for the fly dates. When's the right moment to say no, thank you? When you get an opportunity and you really think, well, you know what, this doesn't really align with my core values. Well, how do you broach that?
I think a lot of it comes down to, let's face it, it comes down to money in a lot of things. because we're musicians. We're paid to play music,
Right.
and for the most part, that's great on any situation. But when you're asked to do stuff that and not feeling like you're being rewarded for it the right way, and we all know times are tough now when it comes down to us.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that you have to just say to yourself and be real with yourself. Okay, I'll do this, but two things. Will I be happy doing it? Which, forget all the stuff that you have to go through with a job. Because it's a job. And there's going to be drama.
There's protocol.
All that stuff. But will I be happy internally, doing it for this? And the other thing is that me and you both know is once I accept this, I might always be that guy. Well, hey, he did it for this, so let's get him lower. Let's maybe we'll strike a deal. And once you see that, and then it starts to become about other things. Look, as a sideman, it's not our dream, it's not our vision.
Right. It's somebody else's dream.
It's somebody else's vision. And you have to accept that. You have to be okay with that.
You have to resolve that.
And like me being let go for certain reasons or not being picked, that's what we signed up for.
Right.
It's part of what we should know is the reality of this.
Right. Hold that thought. So basically, sorry, it's somebody else's. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and you have to be okay with certain things.
Right.
But if it doesn't align with, once you get past that, if you're still not happy, then you have to make some decisions. The bottom line is, I don't care who you are, and who you're playing for. We're not safe.
We're not safe. I always say that. Don't get comfortable.
Safe, thinking that you're invincible. Even as a player, you could be the hot kid 1 minute, and there's always going to be somebody that's going to come and take your spot. You know what I mean?
Woo. And with social media now, the only difference is it's more visible.
It's more visible.
There have always been monster players out there. You just didn't know about it because there was no platform. Yeah. Now you can literally dial them up on your phone and be like, wait a minute, that person is so shredding delicious. Yeah.
Or just somebody that just has it. You know what I mean? I've seen a couple of young kids, man, that I'm like, all right, this is the kid. This is the kid that's going to do it. You know what I mean? And
Agreed.
Look, somebody eventually beat Mike Tyson. Somebody eventually beat Muhammad Ali. I mean, they're out there. You know what I mean?
So true, man.
And that's the thing. But as you grow, there's another thing we talked about. It's the wisdom that you gain, and with that wisdom is your self-worth. You know what I mean? It's your confidence.
Okay.
And how you
this
value
is perfect
yourself.
Because let me just preface this. This is negotiating 101 here.
Right.
So your self-worth, how you value yourself, what you bring to the table. I was going to ask you, how do you approach that? Negotiating with management. First of all, I never talk to the artist about anything business. Right.
Never, ever.
Okay.
Ever.
How do you negotiate? Like again, so we know you go to management. Look, how do you deal with that? How do you broach that subject?
I want everything laid out before I say anything, before I accept anything
But how do you get management to take that bait? Because a lot of times they ask you, what do you want? They're trying to get you to put a number out before, you know what I mean? How do you...
Well, if I do that, I have my numbers in my head of what it would take, and you always shoot high, man. You know what I mean? You shoot high. You hope for the best.
Right.
Because obviously you're gonna go down from there. Most of the time, people are, everybody's trying to cut corners. I think I've been in a situation where they had to come to me and say, hey, we can't pay you what we were paying you, last year or whatever.
I've been in situations too. Yeah.
I was on one tour. I did a tour for this artist for their first album, and they were really successful. And then it was time to do the second, the second record came out, and they came to me like, hey, they want you back, but we can only pay you half of what, and my thing was like, I understand, but I was like, when you work a job and you put some time in, you're supposed to get a raise, not go the other way. But our field doesn't work like that, and we have been hit pretty hard, especially in the last 10 years. You know, it's I've seen it take a dramatic fall. But, you know, you have to know not only your worth, but the artist's worth.
All right.
You know what I mean?
And what other value is being brought to the table aside from the monetary compensation? You know, one of the things I always say that you're really not in a position to negotiate until you're willing to walk.
Right.
If you know that you can walk away from the gig, then you can say, you know, okay, now we can negotiate because now it's going to mean something.
Right.
Other than that, really, negotiating doesn't exist because, like you said, if you're going to lower your price, that's not a negotiation. Right. That you're acquiescing.
You're just giving. You're agreeing with them.
Yeah,
basically.
Absolutely. This wraps another episode of the Career Musician Podcast with yours truly, Nomad. One more thing I wanted to say about Joe. First of all, thank you for making the time, Joe. And also, Joe was a remix artist with his cousin Steve Augello in the late 90s, early 2000s back in New York City. And I really dig what they do. Guys, you should bring it back, man. Bring it back. All right, don't forget, subscribe, download, leave a review. Very important. Stream, check it out, share, like, follow, love the Career Musician Podcast. Until next time, rock and roll, R&B, and literally all styles in between.
That's a wrap for today. Be sure to leave a review and subscribe to the Career Musician Podcast.
I'm just a nomad, nowhere man. Writing the songs in this one-man band. A nomad, yeah. I'm a nomad, hush now, darling, you'll be fine. I'll be back this way sometime. Until then, baby, don't you cry, 'cause I'll be calling. Nomad here, host and creator of the Career Musician Podcast, wanting to tell you all about PantheonPodcast.com network. I am a part of this collective that is solely music-based podcasts. And guess what? It is the only one of its kind on the globe so far. It is a collective of an independent network of podcasts, all based on music, which dig into the culture, technology, history, and everything else you can imagine that has to do with music. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to check us out at PantheonPodcasts.com.